Last week, we covered the start of the Battle of Attu, a very important engagement that would bring the Aleutian Islands campaign to its final conclusion. But concurrent to the North Pacific engagement, the Japanese had also been planning to embark on a new offensive in central China, aiming to avenge their long string of casualties suffered against the staunch Chinese defenders. We'll recall that the invaders had recently won an important victory during their operation north of the Yangtze, so their aim was now to secure the river by clearing the defenders from their positions to the south. Thus we'll not only continue to cover the pivotal Battle of Attu, but today we'll also turn to China to cover the start of this bloody new offensive. Don't forget to check out our long podcast on the topic, the link is in the description. This video is brought to you by our Patreon supporters and YouTube members. They get exclusive videos weekly. Right now, the patrons and YouTube members have 30 videos to choose from, with series on the Peloponnesian War, Italian War of Unification, Risorgimento, and History of Prussia. You can join their ranks by pressing the join button under the video, or use the link in the description and pinned comment to watch exclusive videos, access our member-only Discord, see our schedule, and get early access to the public videos. Thanks for supporting us. Before we turn to the China theatre, we first need to analyse the war of attrition that was happening at sea in the Pacific Ocean. As we all know, merchant fleets are important economic assets for nations, especially those that have limited natural resources or a relatively small industrial base, such as it was in the case of Japan. As such, starting in 1942, the US directed its submarine force to wage an increasingly effective campaign against the Japanese merchant shipping and the IJN. This increase in effectiveness would only really start in late 1943, as the problems of the defective Mark 14 torpedo began to be fixed. Yet the Japanese would still incur substantial damage by the start of the year, having suffered the loss of more than 1 million tons of shipping. Although the Japanese were also making many additions to replace the lost ships, the situation had deteriorated so much that there was an increased demand for shipping to be used in the transportation of men, munitions, and the necessary raw materials required for the production of munitions back in the homeland. As a result, there was no shipping available for secondary theatres like China or the North Pacific, so the Japanese commanders in China had to acquire the necessary resources by any other means. At Yichang, for instance, there were approximately 20,000 tons of steamer tonnage for inland river navigation, which could alleviate the problem of supply in the China theatre, but the Chinese control of the southern bank of the Yangtze River prevented them from moving the ships forward to Wuhan. For this purpose, General Hata Shinroku deemed it necessary to advance onto the southern bank of the Yangtze in West Hubei to occupy the general area between Yichang and Yueyang in order to open the river for navigation and to crush the enemy's fighting strength located there. It's important to remember that during the February-March operation north of the Yangtze, the 11th Army of General Yokoyama had managed to occupy the Yangtze River bank from Jingzhou to Yueyang. As a preliminary for the West Hubei offensive, Yokoyama also ordered the 40th Division to advance from Shishou to the neighbourhood of Huarong, successfully capturing the line running east and west of this town between April 9th and 15th. By the start of May, the 40th thus sent the Koshiba detachment to the west to prepare for an attack against the town of Nan, while the 3rd Division and the 17th Independent Mixed Brigade deployed on Shishou to assault the main Chinese base at Anshang. Additionally, the 34th Division's Harigaya detachment at Yueyang was to make a wide flanking movement to strike at the Chinese defences south of Nan and Anshang. If the first phase of the operation was successful, then the 3rd Division was to continue west and attack both flanks of the enemy at Jijiang and Gong'an, supported by the 58th Division's Nozoe detachment and the bulk of the 13th Division. On May 5th, the West Hubei offensive finally started, with the 3rd Division and the 17th Brigade immediately crossing the Yangtze and advancing southwards as they broke through the enemy defences of the 26th Army. Meanwhile, units of the 40th Division also started their movements south and east to secure their control over the Yueyang area. with the Toda detachment rapidly attacking the Chinese positions around Yushanjian. Further east, the Harigaya detachment crossed the Dongdongting Lake with haste and managed to destroy the enemy positions and obstacles near the Hungling-hu, supported by the main force of the 44th Air Regiment. So relentless and strong was the Japanese advance that the defenders never stood a chance against them, rapidly starting to withdraw south and west. By May 8th, the 3rd Division had defeated the enemy trying to escape towards the area west of Anxiang, successfully intercepting their route of retreat westwards, while the 17th Brigade occupied Anxiang itself. Further east, Nan was likewise captured by the Koshiba detachment, and additionally, the Chinese positions to the south were successfully destroyed by the combined attacks of the Toda and Harigaya detachments. It's important to mention that at the town of Changjiao, the ruthless invaders carried out possibly the second largest massacre of Chinese civilians in the entire war, completely slaughtering around 30,000 civilians in the next 4 days. With the satisfactory conclusion of the first phase of the operation, the 3rd Division then ascended to Songzi River and assembled at once around Tuochuanbu, while the 17th Brigade moved to the vicinity of Lixian to protect the Japanese rear left flank. To the north, the 13th Division and the Nozoe detachment also assembled in the area east of Xiaoting to prepare for an attack on Jijiang. On May 12th, the second phase of the operation finally started, with the 13th Division immediately crossing the Yangtze to attack Jijiang, while the 3rd Division moved with speed to trap the almost 50,000 Chinese soldiers of the 87th Army at Gong'an. Once again, the Chinese forces were completely unprepared to face the effective Japanese pincer maneuver, with the invaders rapidly defeating the main force of the Chinese army on both flanks and pursuing the fleeing defenders towards Songzi. By May 18th, the Songzi position had fallen and the defenders had escaped south after suffering many casualties, leaving only the 18th Army in the path of the Japanese to victory. But now we have to turn to the North Pacific, where the Battle of Attu was still raging. As we last saw, Colonel Zimmerman's southern force was pinned down at Massacre Valley, just in front of the Jiamin Pass, while both Colonel Kulin's northern force and Captain Willoughby's scout battalion had made some progress in the Holtz Bay area and were preparing to launch a full-scale assault towards the mountains. The weather was bad, visibility was poor, and the fog continued to conceal the Japanese positions. Even worse, losses from exposure were mounting, as the clothing issued in San Francisco was not nearly warm enough for Attu's trenches. Thus the men were found to be frostbitten, feverish, and unconscious, and they streamed to the rear by the score and then by the hundreds. Furthermore, their artillery was stuck far away from the battlefield, the supply situation was critical, and the Air Force was grounded at Adak and Amchitka. Despite this, General Brown decided to feel out the enemy defences with another assault on May 14th, throwing Zimmerman's 3rd Battalion against the Jiamin Pass with the support of carrier aircraft. Yet Nassau's Wildcats would be caught by a willy-war early in the morning, losing 3 fighters, and the troops would likewise run into a rain of fire that caused such severe casualties that Zimmerman was forced to relieve the battered unit with the 2nd Battalion 32nd Regiment. Further south, the newly arrived 1st Battalion 32nd Regiment was still bogged down on the overcrowded beach as the unloading of transports had been carried out with a lack of efficiency. In contrast, Northern Force managed to keep the flow of supplies moving smoothly across Beach Red and up the front, a remarkable achievement that contributed to Kulin's success. The worrying situation in the south also forced Brown to reluctantly request to bring General Buckner's 4th Regiment from Adak. Yet Admirals Rockwell and Kincaid refused because of the congestion at the beach, something that didn't sit well with the army officers. Additionally, that morning, Rockwell's battleships had exhausted all their bombardment ammunition from afar, so they would go back to Adak to rearm, leaving Brown with a crucial lack of bombardment support. On the other side, Kincaid was also unhappy at the army's lack of progress, so he requested Brown to write a report on the situation. Unfortunately, the PBY carrying the reports accidentally dropped them into the sea, so Kincaid and Rockwell would grow angry with Brown's silence. In the meantime, Kulin's men fired and withstood mortar and artillery barrages as they consolidated their position, successfully inflicting many casualties on the desperate defenders. And in the mountains, Willoughby's scouts fought an all-day series of grim firefights in the intense cold, while very low on ammunition and with no food for the third day straight. By evening, nearly half his men were casualties, but they had to keep crawling forward, as their only hope of survival was to break through the enemy lines. Luckily for them, Colonel Yamasaki would decide to withdraw his forces to the Moor Ridge on the far side of Holt's Valley, leaving behind large stores of ammunition and food. Evidently, they retreated to avoid getting caught between Northern Force and the Scout Battalion. Thus, on the morning of May 15th, Kulin's forces marched into Holt's Valley and spent the afternoon securing the area. With the enemy gone, Willoughby's straggling men also limped across the ridges, finally stumbling down into Holt's Bay and their salvation. About 80 men were left behind in rearguard positions, but the remaining 320 scouts would manage to join Northern Force. Although only 11 men had been killed, Willoughby's strength was down to 165 scouts, most of them suffering from gangrene and bandaged at their feet and knees. Meanwhile, Kulin readied his battalions to move east during the night, hoping to push back the Japanese from Moor Ridge to the Chichagov Valley in an effort to cut off the Jamin Pass defenders. Further south, Zimmermann led yet another frontal assault against the pass, but like the others, it fell back under a cruel fusillade from 3 directions. That noon, Rockwell also decided to pull out of Attu with his vessels within the next 24 hours, as his North Pacific force was a sitting duck. But meanwhile, Brown and Rockwell continued to argue over the transportation of the 4th Regiment. Communications were so bad and confusing that Brown would have to board Rockwell's flagship to discuss the matter personally, leaving General Arnold in temporary command ashore. Luckily, Brown managed to convince Rockwell as he made his plea, so Rockwell would ultimately send a message to Kinkaid endorsing Brown's request for the 4th Regiment. Additionally, they requested road equipment for Colonel Benjamin Talley's engineers, including fuel and construction supplies to last for 60 days, as they wanted to build roads to clear the jam on the beach. But unfortunately, Brown and Rockwell didn't foresee that their hastily worded message to Kinkaid left itself open to misinterpretation, as Kinkaid saw the engineers' request as an indication that Brown expected the battle to last for 60 days. It's important to remember that the original plan was to capture Attu in 3 days, and we were now in the 5th day of the battle. Furthermore, the message made it appear Brown had gone on the defensive and proposed to sit still until he got his reinforcements. This completely angered Kinkaid, who then decided to consult with Generals Buckner and DeWitt on what to do, both of whom never liked Brown in the first place. Thus, it would be ultimately decided to replace Brown because of his inexperience with the Aleutians. In his stead, General Landrum would be appointed to command the 7th Division, as he had already led with success the Adak landings. On May 16th, as they were informed of this decision, both Rockwell and Brown were shocked to learn this news, but there was not much they could do about it, as Landrum was already en route. In the meantime, Brown was still in command, so he ordered yet another head-on assault against the Jamin Pass by Zimmermann's forces. But once again, the attack would fall back without making a single dent in the effective enemy defences, suffering so many losses that the 2nd Battalion 32nd Regiment had to be relieved by the reformed 3rd Battalion 17th Regiment. To the north, however, Kulin's battalions had crossed the Holtz Valley under the cover of night and were putting much pressure on the Moor Ridge positions. Heavy fire from the rim pinned the attackers to the valley floor, but although the Japanese were defending Moor Ridge with great ferocity, Kulin would cunningly send out some platoons along the beach to his left in a flanking movement that successfully allowed the Americans to climb the steep seaside ends of the ridges. Against the tough opposition, they advanced from hump to hump and charged into several hours of savage hand-to-hand fighting, eventually securing a foothold on the ridge by nightfall. At this point, General Landrum had arrived to relieve Brown, and after an awkward meeting in which Landrum made it clear that he found no fault with what Brown had done and that he would continue with his tactical plans, the former 7th Division commander took his last look at Attu and began his return to the States. Without his knowledge, General DeWitt would later give him an unfavorable officer efficiency report, which blocked Brown's promotion chances later on in his career. On Moore Ridge, meanwhile, the Japanese were subsisting on one meal a day, usually a single ball of cold rice. Some broke under the strain of the cold and hunger, breaking away from the rest and attacking American positions in order to be shot and put out of their misery. With such weakened forces, Colonel Yamazaki ultimately decided to abandon Moore Ridge and the Holtz Bay area and retreat into the Prendergast and Fish Hook ridges during the night. This move also left the Jiamin Pass defenders in an untenable position, so the 303rd Independent Battalion would be ordered to pull back and defend the Klevsi Pass instead, just as Kulin and Brown had expected. Shortly after midnight on May 17th, Kulin launched a night attack to take the rest of Moore Ridge, and after a couple of hours of cautious advance, the 3rd Battalion 32nd Regiment reached the ridge top to find that the Japanese had withdrawn from Holtz Valley, leaving behind large stocks of supplies and equipment, including their artillery guns. Unbeknownst to them, however, the carrier Nassau had launched a bomb-strafing attack against the ridge Kulin had just taken, unfortunately wounding several men. As a result, Kincaid would decide to send Colonel Erickson to Attu to coordinate airstrikes with ground operations. Northern Force would spend the rest of the day consolidating their positions in Holtz Bay, which now allowed the Americans to move their ships into the west arm of Holtz Bay and use the good harbour facilities there instead of the little strip at Beach Red. Additionally, Captain Willoughby sent some patrols to link with Southern Force at Jiamin Pass, which would arrive there the next morning. Further south, the fog prevented Zimmermann from noticing that the enemy had retreated. As he sent some patrols to the pass, which effectively found the enemy gone, he would finally occupy the Jiamin Pass with a fresh company by the end of the day. As a last note, the 1st Battalion 4th Regiment would also arrive from Adak on this day, further increasing the strength of the attackers after the Holtz Bay breakthrough. On May 18th, Admiral Rockwell thus declared the end of the amphibious phase of the battle, at last taking with him the bulk of his naval forces back to Adak. Now it was time to transition into a phase of full mountain warfare. But we'll have to wait for that until next week, when we finally bring this bloody battle to its final conclusion. If you don't want to miss any episodes, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.